So we are live now. Okay. So a very warm welcome to all of you. On this occasion of Human Rights Day, we celebrate the harmony within ourselves by bridging rights and mental health and therapy. And before we start with our session, I'm going to give a brief introduction of what therapy is and how we have started our journey. So, at Therapy, we envision a community of mental health professionals who are able to provide quality care to clients and consistently have access to reliable platform for their professional development. And we have an amazing academy for professional growth of mental health called Flourish, and this has been also established with this vision in mind that we are going to provide a learning opportunities for the professionals in the field of psychology, psychiatric, social work, and psychiatry. So, without further ado, I would like you all to introduce to our first speaker, Mr. Vikramjit Sen, and I'm going to give a glimpse of his bio. So he has done LLM from CU, and he completed his post-graduation diploma in financial management from IISWBN, serving 11 years as a judge in the West Bengal Judiciary, and at present he is the Judicial Magistrate Paschim Mednipur. He delivered many talks at seminars and workshops in universities like IIT Kharagpur, St. Xavier, and Sister Nivedita. Welcome to you, sir, to our platform.
Thank
And our
you.
next speaker, Dr. Ananya Sinha. She is the founder, director of therapy, and a chief clinical psychologist. So, I would also like to give a brief introduction of her as well. Dr. Ananya Sinha is an RCI registered clinical psychologist with over 13 years of experience. She is an international affiliate member of the American Psychological Association, a member of the Global Clinical Practice Network of the World Health Organization, and a member of the Society for Psychotherapy Research Europe chapter. She pursued her MPhil in clinical psychology from the Institute of Human Behavior and Allied Sciences, Delhi, and her PhD from the prestigious Department of Clinical Psychology, NIMHANS. Welcome to you, ma'am, as well. So I would like to
Thank you.
thank both of you for being a part of this significant discussion. So let's begin our discussion. And by addressing the topic of access to mental health as a human right, I would like to ask first, the first question goes to Vikramjit Sen. How would you describe the current state of access to mental health services as a human right in our society?
Thank you, Anisha, for having me, and thank you to the team of Therapy for organizing this discussion on a very relevant topic. But before starting and going into the mental health issue and access to mental health healthcare, I would like to congratulate Team Therapy for organizing this discussion because this year is the 75th year of adoption of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in the year 1948, and we have traversed nearly 75 years, and the topic of human rights are well discussed in all the academies, universities, various groups, NGOs. But the topic mental health care in respect of human rights is very, very rarely talked about. So I must once again congratulate the entire team for having this discussion.
Thank you.
Before going into what is human right, we must understand what is law. Law can be described as an instrument which can be used to introduce changes in society. But in most of the cases, what we see is that it is the other way around. The requirements of society, the changes in society drives the enactment of new laws. Previously certain rights were not recognized, but when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, we have certain rights which was recognized all over the world, and those rights must be enjoyed by every individual, whatever be the legal system, whatever be his age, whatever be his gender, whatever be his religion, whatever be his nationality. So those universally recognized human rights are necessary for the enjoyment of a person to grow, to live with dignity. But after a point of time, we saw that these rights are not sufficient because certain communities are not having sufficient access to those rights. We came to realize that certain more rights are required. So therein, separate enactments were made, and here I would like to draw the attention of our audience to the Declaration of Rights of Disabled, which was adopted by the United Nations in the year 1975, which enumerates that everyone, whatever be their disability, be it physical, mental, or some other economic form of disability, everyone should be given the opportunity to enjoy all those human rights which were earlier adopted. So all these civic rights, cultural rights, economic rights are or political rights are protected under the next declaration in the year of 1975. So you cannot be denied of those rights, those basic human rights, just simply on the ground that you are suffering from some kind of disability, be it mental or physical, or be it any other kind of disability. So, internationally, we see that there are many legal instruments which protect the rights of normal individual and specifically those who are in need of special treatment. The ultimate purpose of law is to ensure justice. Law is not something that we administer in courts only, because that is more or less a procedural thing, and we try to do justice as per law. But what is justice? That is very hard to define. Giving equal opportunity to everyone can be described as justice. But if you give equal opportunity to everyone and someone who is in need of some more helping hand, can you term that justice? So giving equal opportunity to everyone may be justice, but who is in need of more care for him, it is not justice. Giving equal distribution of resources may be termed as justice, distributive justice. But if someone's need is much more than you or my, then he should be provided some extra helping hand. So distributive justice can change form. So justice is very hard to define. We have very, legal luminaries, jurists, philosophers defining justice in their own way. We have Dr. Amartya Sen's idea of justice. We have various professors of law like Professor Hart, his justice. There is a debate between his concept of law regarding law. What should be law? Law should be instrument which should be statutorily followed, or it should have some morality behind it. There are theories of justice given by John Rawls. So what is justice is very hard to comprehend. But one thing is very easy to comprehend, that what is injustice? It comes from within. So justice can be defined as something which is absence of injustice. So there is one quote on this day that I would like to, say, which is often repeated, but it is very relevant because, this famous quote of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So he has also not defined what is justice. He had hit upon the idea that if there is somewhere injustice, it will amount to denial of justice everywhere. Because it is very easy to recognize the features of injustice. But when we go into defining justice, we find that there are various limitations and no one definition of justice can cover everything. Now, under this backdrop, why we are discussing justice, because ultimately the aim of universal declaration of human right to give every individual the right to enjoy all those 30 rights which are enumerated in that declaration. Now when we talk about access to mental health, as I have said, the 1975 instrument recognizes the right of certain persons who are having some disability to enjoy economic, social, cultural rights and political rights. Now, these international instruments has to be adopted in the domestic laws. If they are not adopted in the domestic laws, then the citizens of those countries cannot enjoy those rights, cannot have access to those rights. Subsequently, India, being a party to all these international enactments and instruments, adopted the Indian Mental Health Care Act in the year 2017, which is the latest one that we are having at present. Earlier to that, it was the 1987 Act, which was subsequently repealed to bring it up to the present social standards and requirements. You know, so as the country progresses, we have developed a lot, and now mental health care is not something, a subject which is not talked about. It is a welcome change that people are talking about the need of mental health care, the need of having proper scientific, psychological, and psychiatric treatment, not something, to adjust or to, the basic advices that we have. These are nothing, you have to be mentally strong, all those things. So now we have a legal framework in the form of the Mental Health Care Act 2017, which provides under Section 18 the right of access to mental health care. So in India, if someone is suffering from any kind of mental disorder or any kind of issues, and if he wants, he can have his treatment at any government funded institution. That is the only requirement, that the institution has to be government funded, because in the statute the words are used in this, in those terms, that the institution, mental health care establishment, must be government funded. So under Section 18 of that Mental Health Care Act, we find that certain rights are provided to the patient or to the person who is in need of mental care. Okay, but apart from that, in the same act, under Section 101, if there is a person or individual who is in need of mental health or healthcare or help, but he is not in a position to report his situation, and someone else notices that my neighbor or neighbor's son or daughter is suffering from some kind of mental illness and she is not being provided proper medical care, so that person can also go to the police station or the magistrate of the locality and report the matter to that magistrate or the police station. And the magistrate can order an inquiry, ask that person to be produced before him, and if the magistrate has some reason to believe that yes, that this person is having some kind of mental issues which requires treatment, then he can pass an order directing admission of that person in a government run mental health care facility, and he can direct the doctors over there, clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, to prepare a mental health status report and submit it to the court. And in that way also we can monitor what kind of treatment is being provided to that patient. So some kind of legal statutory protection is provided to people having issues of mental health care. So that is the scenario in India at present. And apart from that, there are certain other legal protections which are provided to people who are suffering from unsoundness of mind. It is very common knowledge that accused who is facing trial before the court, and for reason of his unsoundness of mind, he cannot understand what is going on in court, what should be his defense, how he
Hmm.
should face the trial, then he has the statutory right
Hmm.
and he can ask for protection, or rather the court should give him protection that this person cannot face trial. So what is to be done? The court, under the code of criminal procedure by which we are guided in India, the trial courts are guided by the code of criminal procedure. So the code of criminal procedure also provides that if someone is, due to unsoundness of his mind, is not in a position to defend himself, he can also be referred to a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, but to a
Hmm.
government hospital, of course. Then we have to ask for report from that government hospital. And if the report also shows that this person is not in a sound mental state to face trial, then we can suspend trial and direct that person for treatment. If he is in need of indoor treatment, he can be directed to be admitted in a mental health care facility for further treatment. And if he is not in need of indoor treatment, but someone is there in his family or friend to look after him and assures the court that he will be taken care of and provided proper medicines and medical requirements are looked after, then that accused person temporarily may be released on bail also for undergoing treatment and come back before the court to face trial when he has recovered from such mental illness. Secondly, we also know that a child of immature understanding, someone who is below the age of 12, above the age of 7 in India. So 7 to 12, if a child is of immature understanding or mentally retarded, unable to understand the consequences of his act, he is also protected from any kind of penal prosecution under the Indian laws. But who will assess or who will provide those kind of assessment to the court, and who will provide the treatment to these individuals? Because in every country there are shortage of resources. As I have just said, what is justice? You can ask for distribution of resources, but if you ask for too much of resources, then other people will feel injustice. So there is a dilemma how to balance. You cannot ask all the resources for treatment of people having mental issues. There are children who are in the need of, who are vulnerable positions, who are in need of care and protection. We have a separate law for that, Juvenile Justice Act. So we have to provide them schooling, we have to provide them shelter, we have to provide them everything if they are in need. So government has to provide resources for that also. Government has to provide resources for everyone's need. But as we grow, it is it is not wrong to hope that things will change for the better. At present, I am giving you the scenario of West Bengal. In West Bengal, there are 6 to 7 government funded institutions having facility of indoor treatment for people in requirement of mental health care. So 6 to 7 hospitals in a big state like West Bengal, I don't think that is sufficient, but it is better than having nothing. Things are changing. So trained mental health care professionals are not readily available. Even if they are readily available, they are not being paid, commensurate to their qualifications. You cannot get best of the services if you are not being paid for your services. I had the experience of dealing with many child counselors and child psychologists, being the principal magistrate of the Juvenile Justice Board many years ago. So in those cases, it is mandate of the law that a child who is in conflict with law or a child who is in need of care and protection, he or she has not broken any law, but she is in need of care and protection. She is a vulnerable child. Those child or those children who are in conflict with law, they used to be produced before me. And it is mandate of the law that child has to be counseled by a properly trained child counselor or a child psychologist. But where are those child psychologists? In most of the cases, in every district, there is a juvenile justice board and there is a principal magistrate, but there is rarely any full-time child psychologist posted. Or in most of the cases, we find that someone who is posted as a child psychologist have a master degree in social work, nothing to do with child psychology. So someone having a master's in sociology is appointed as a child psychologist. So there are areas which need improvement, but things are changing. As I am in service for the last 11 years. When I entered into judicial services, things were not so good. Now things are much better than what it used to be. In the meantime, the mental health care was enacted in 2017, so things got a little bit more better. So now we can say that most of the persons working in the field of law at least, they are aware of the challenges, but they are aware of the rights also. I don't know whether I deserve to be in the same panel with Dr. Ananya Sinha, because she is much more experienced in this field. But from my limited knowledge, what I can say is that, earlier nobody used to talk about mental illness in court, but now we generally we have initiated these discussions. Even in cases of family dispute, there are provisions of family counselor. But what we do as judges, that we try to play the role of counselor. We invite the husband and the wife to our chamber, and we give them in a chamber hearing. We try to counsel them as best with that we can. We are not trained counselors. We have limited tools, and we do not have those skill set. But even from the point of law, we try to explain the things, that how things will go if you go on dragging this case, how life will end in the meantime, and the case will run for 20 years. So we try to counsel them and try to make them understand. But I personally believe that in every family court, if there is a trained counselor, psychologist who are having the correct skill set to deal with all those situations, then the load on the courts will also, will come down, and we will be doing what we are trained to do, deciding cases instead of counseling. And instead of counseling a child, the child is to be produced before me, and I have to make him understand that nothing will happen to you. You will be in a very secure environment. You can trust me, and you can state what has happened with you, because they are in a state of mental trauma. In most of the cases, the child who has been a victim, they are not in a correct mental state to narrate the things faced by him or her. So they had to be counseled for 2-3 days before we can take their statement. But if we take their statement before proper counseling, they will be not in a position to narrate the entire incident correctly, and many things will be left out. And then when the matter will go in trial before the court, then such loopholes will be utilized by the defense to get an order of acquittal for the accused. So that child is not in a correct mental state to give statement, has to be assessed by a trained child psychologist. And that report can be a very important document for the court. At the time of trial also, if the child is properly counseled and someone testified that this child is in a fit mental state to give evidence,
Right.
then only the court can rely on the witnesses of those child witnesses. Otherwise, people will, defense will generally claim the child was in an agitated state and he or she stated many things which has not actually happened. So there is an allegation of exaggeration चाइल्ड ने बना बना के बोल दिया. So these things are there, but with the time, things will improve. I can hope. That's all in my starting observation, and
Thank you
now.
so Thank you so much. It's always wonderful to hear you, and I think I have been fortunate enough to hear Mr. Vikramjeet speak earlier, and it's wonderful to be back. And it's an honor to be as a part of a panel with him, because the kind of knowledge he shares, I don't think any of us here has the ability to share. I think he highlighted many important points. The journey of defining what is like what is justice. I think that is where I was also reflecting as a clinical psychologist the relevance of that, and I was also thinking that we often are stuck in this ethical dilemma, like what is ethical, what is not. And so I understand the gray aspect of it and how difficult it is to sometimes decide what is just and what is unjust. But at the same time, you highlighted a very important point, and I think I would like to just take a moment to also reflect or like share my reflections on that. But one of the many important things is it's commendable how overall organizations like UN and WHO are saying that mental health is a universal human right, and the mental health care bill has come up. So at a policy level, uh, we have started talking about mental health as a right. At the same time, I'm not sure as an action level where we are. When it comes to clinical psychologists or anybody from the mental health, I think one thing that is common to our training is we start with the basic principles of ethics, and one of the primary principle of ethics is that of justice and fairness, that you cannot discriminate based on any factor. You have to provide the same kind of quality care to anyone and everyone who comes to you. And we are fortunate enough also to be have able to have different kinds of exposure in our training. So we sometimes train in government hospitals, we have internships in different places. So it's almost inculcated in us. But it's a part of the training. I'm not sure at a policy level when we are talking about rights and access, how the other pillars or other as when we are talking of society, like you were talking about policy. So if I now say that a daily wage worker wants to access quality care, quality mental health care, how do we ensure that we are being able to they can access it? So we are first stuck with the area of access, that how much access can we give, can if they have to come all the way from a rural area to, let's say, a city for quality care, is that what we are calling as universal right and universal access? Right, we understand, but the right is only possible to experience when we have access to experience that right. So I think there's a lot of scope in terms of for the policymakers to make changes, to make thoughtful changes, to make mindful scope. And I think we have already started. We are grateful that the government has started the Telemanas approach, like where Telemanas is basically the government has started enrolling. It's a toll-free number where someone can call and they're connected with counselors and clinical psychologists, and there's an app also that is being connected to it. So it has started, but there is a lot more to do when it comes to really making it accessible. And to add with that, I think one more thing that you highlighted, which is very important, is the lack of trained professionals. Like if we are like a country with almost 1 billion population, and if we are that is only India, we are talking about it as a universal, like all across the world, and how many trained professionals do we have? So there has to be a lot more um, push, and I would love to see a world where we have each person has one dedicated therapist for themselves. But we are definitely far away from that part. But like we have a long way to go. We have definitely come a far way along. I know, I remember the time I started studying and everybody would be like, oh, you're studying psychology. I started my journey as a part of the correctional home I was a clinical psychologist there, and I could see how, the judiciary system, the police, and others, how they thought and talked about mental health and how it has shifted over the years. So it's very promising on one hand, while I know there's a long, long way to go. So that's a very, very pertinent point, that if we are really talking about right, mental health care access as a right, we have to also ensure there are people to provide that mental health care. Otherwise, if we just ask for that right, what will happen? Like, whom are we going to send those people? And it was, it was, very. It's sad in a way to see when you shared the challenges that the court faces. That, like, now that I'm talking to you, I hear you speaking about the challenges sometimes court faces, and it would be bridged if there is a trained mental health professional involved. And when I talk to different people from different sectors of the society, the same thing is echoed, that we need trained people. So as a I think as a takeaway from what you shared is, it's promising to have an act in place, and that too, like in 2017, after a long break, we had this act, and it was like, it's a big, big step, and the government is taking many, many actions to ensure mental health care is accessible. But at the same time, the primary thing should be making trained care professionals available. And second, I think, is when we talk about rights, there are conversations which required. Although we are conversing, I'm not sure whether are we really fighting the real stigma that we have held for long about mental health. Till now, if we say that, okay, I'm feeling a bit sad and I don't know whether I'm depressed, I would like to go and check up with a therapist, how would your boss or your company react? Can we really very freely go and say that, okay, as a judge, I can go, I want to seek therapy and I have my therapy session at 3 p.m. Can I just leave and I'll come back? Or we still think about the stigma associated. So if we are really talking about rights, it has to be about really breaking the stigma. Have conversations where we know that it is a basic human need and a right. It is a right because it is a basic human need. We don't think twice to reach out to a doctor when we have fever. But when we are sad and upset, and I'm just talking about one aspect of mental health. Of course, mental health is not just about depression. There's so many other things. But we still don't feel comfortable immediately going, so it will happen, it's okay. And still there are people, and many in number, who will say that, be strong. Why are you being so weak? Just, leave it. Don't focus on this. These are what weak people say. So till we actually start addressing these conversations, till we actually start standing up against these conversations and psychoeducating them, and have conversations not only in the, most of the conversations I think right now happening in the social media. So Instagram friendly people are very well versed with mental health. What about people who are not in social media? What about people in the rural communities? Are we having discussions like this in panchayat? Are we having discussions like this in the local language with people in the evening while they're having, are we having
May I
these kind of?
interject?
Yes, please.
I passed an order of against, I passed an order in a situation which required my intervention, and I took the person in my safe custody and I transferred him to a mental health care institution. And that order was something unheard of in the district. Means the other people were asking, how can a magistrate take someone into his safe custody and forward him for treatment? But I told them it is there in the law. It is there in the law since 2017, and I passed that order just 3 months back in 2023. So
Wow.
even if it is there in the law books, if it is there, the rights are there in the books, in these statutes. But if you have not heard about your right,
Hmm.
then how can that be, realized? And
Absolutely.
in that situation, we feel about the requirement of raising the level of awareness.
Hmm.
The rights should not be confined in the law books or the
Hmm.
acts made by the parliament. The
Hmm.
rights will only be meaningful if we try to employ those acts, provisions of those acts, and try to get relief. And if we do not get relief, then we have to approach the courts for getting the government to do those things that they have written in the books that they will do. So may I just read for the benefit of our discussion the salutary provisions that is there in Section 18 of the Mental Healthcare Act.
Mm-hmm.
Section 18 states that every person shall have a right to access mental health care and treatment from mental health services run or funded by appropriate government. Now, what are these services? The right to access mental health care and treatment shall mean mental health services of affordable cost, of good quality, available in sufficient quantity, accessible geographically without discrimination on the basis of gender, sex, sexual orientation, religion, culture, caste, social or political beliefs, class, disability, or any other basis, and provided in a manner that is acceptable to persons with mental illness and their families and caregivers. I think this section 18(1) and 2 should be quoted in the office and displayed in every mental health care institution, so that every patient or family members visiting those mental health care institution or clinics are aware that the law recognizes their right to access, to have quality and affordable medical mental health care facility. So if you are not aware about your right, how can you go to the court and ask that that hospital is not providing me my treatment? You can ask, go to the High Court and file a writ and direct the government to provide mental health care treatment. And if it is not providing, then the salutary provisions of these words there in the law are being defeated.
Hmm. That is such a wonderful suggestion. So first of all, congratulations on passing the judgment that you talked about, and that is like kudos to you. And we really need more people who not only it's not actually about awareness, it's also about really having the intent to implement the awareness of what is there in the act. So kudos to you, many congratulations. And this is one of the best suggestions. I think we will probably start doing it soon in our website. We'll definitely
Thank
give
you.
put in the section 1 and 2. That's the first step that we can probably take. So thank you for the suggestion. Over to you, Anisha.
Thank you so much to both the speakers. Amazingly, you have expressed how the revolution has taken place over the years, even in India, and how Vikramjit Sen has described what justice means. It's very important to understand, and so from there we can understand the source of justice. So it's equally important to be aware of that. Moving ahead, I would like to ask. Uh, so we have talked about the changes that took place in India. So what are the best practices from other countries that could be applied to improve the mental health access in in our context?
Anisha, I don't think I have the correct experience to answer that question. But since as a working judge, I had interacted with many other academicians, and they are working on these human rights issues and international law.
Mm-hmm.
So, being a signatory to human United Nations covenants, every legal system or a country who having a valid legal system, they are bound to recognize those universally declared human rights as well as the covenants which were subsequently ratified. And if we go through the objective of our act that we have in India, the act was we had an earlier act, 1987 act, but that was repealed and replaced by the 2017 act. Why? Because the international law required that certain more safeguards are to be given to people having mental disorder or illness, and that convention was known as Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and its optional protocol, which was adopted by the United Nations in the year 2006. So similarly, if we have this domestic enactment to satisfy the requirements of the international conventions, similarly, all the other countries which are part of the United Nations and have ratified that convention, they must have similar kind of act in their domestic, countries in their domestic laws. So I don't have any first-hand experience regarding the legal system outside India, but I expect that if those countries are part of the United Nations, they will also have their domestic laws similar in lines that we have in India, and we can do a statistical survey of how many courts are ordering in various legal geographies, and our passing order, giving benefit of the act to the persons who are suffering from mental disorders. We can always do an international survey, and you can fix one country from each continent and do a survey, and then you can have a good paper.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's a
definitely.
great. Anisha, I think you have to change the name in the banner also. It's showing my name,
Okay.
I think, since Sir is
Okay. Yeah.
speaking.
Just a minute. Hmm. Yes, definitely. And survey is a good way to understand the situation of our country, and to align our laws with theirs as well. In a global way, we'll get a bigger picture. Definitely.
I think survey also
So
allows us to explore, like it's sort of an exploratory tool. So we often only get to know the reality of the situation when we ask and we get the response. So that's an amazing way of really exploring what is happening in other countries than just reviewing through the existing policies and knowing about that. I think this again highlights the gap between policy and the action and implementation, if any. So I think that's an amazing suggestion by
And
Mr. Sen.
Dr. Sinha is a in a well connected position to do and organize this survey, because he is a member of a number of international organizations.
I'll definitely take your this suggestion also. It's good. It's becoming a very fruitful discussion. I think for us at therapy
definitely.
also, we're getting very,
Exactly.
very nice suggestions which are implementable. So thank you.
Yes. Moving ahead, I have a question for ma'am. So I would like to ask: are there specific populations that face unique challenges in accessing our mental health services?
This is a tricky question actually. When you say there people having difficulty accessing, as mental health care providers, we ethically cannot discriminate, and we do not discriminate. When it comes to access, we have to understand where is the difficulty coming from. Like I was talking about the daily wage workers. Now that's a practical problem. We have seen people who are coming to OPDs like OPD of Nimhans or Ipaz, who say that we are actually, while because we are traveling here, we were not earning today. And now that we know in mental health care, particularly, we need regular sessions. So they cannot really come and take session every week because they will be losing their daily wages, which is their survival. So when we it's coming to access, again, let's talk about communities. The cure community, the mental health care community, they are now very vocal about the inclusivity. We as an organization, therapy, we always talk about our values, which is that of inclusivity and being social justice informed. We try very hard to ensure that everybody can approach us. We will try to understand your background and then accordingly give you the best care. Now, the question here again becomes, what is the best care? How many of us are trained in queer affirmative services? If I'm saying that you have to, it's not about just right to care, it is right to quality care. What Mrs. Sen just read out, it was again everything, accessibility, affordability, everything was then lined by quality care and not just any care. So that means we have an onus to upgrade ourselves, to train ourselves to be queer affirmative. Now, queer affirmative, LGBTQ is just one community. So accordingly, are we neurodivergent affirmative and trained to deal with that? So again, it brings in the aspect of competence and how we are continuously upgrading ourselves to ensure that we are actually providing the quality care that one has to access. One has the right to access. Again, it is also our responsibility as a mental health team to continuously create the awareness. Like rights in the act has no value until unless people know that it is right. Mr. Vikram just pointed out that it is like rights really have no value. There are so many rights. Even I don't know, if you ask me to enumerate my rights as a citizen of India, I will not be able to do that, because that is not something we constantly talk about. But if I am in a problem, probably I will go back and read and Google and understand. So similarly, that mental health right, what exactly it means and how to make it accessible, these are some of the things that we have to constantly train people. So I think one of the aspect about like some people from a particular community or particular sector of the society, it's about how accessible it is. We are talking of long term care. It is not just going to a doctor and getting yourself checked and coming back. It is long term care, and when we talk of long term care, real therapy actually happens when you are seeing a client at least weekly once for 10 to 12 sessions minimum. We know that it will not work if that kind of care is not given. So we have, if we are talking about accessibility, we have to ask ourselves that this person has to access this care 10 to 12 weeks from now. What are the things they need? Telemanas again is a wonderful initiative, and I think it shouldn't just be a government initiative. Each and every mental health professional, including organizations like us, we all should be engaged in it to ensure that, okay, where are the places where we are not being able to access? When we are talking about differently abled individuals, I have taken sessions with individuals who are visually impaired, and I had to first learn how to conduct online sessions with somebody who is visually impaired. And interestingly, he was the one who trained me. He told me, you use these softwares, these are the things, this is how it works, because we had to share sheets online and how to do it. So it is, we have to first think where we are not being able to reach. What are the places we are not being able to reach? And I think it is, there are some sects of the society which comes very quickly to our mind, but there are ones which we hold like our own biases. We are individuals first and then therapists later. So we have to be honest with ourselves that we also have biases which will not come and should not come in our therapeutic services. And that can only happen when we are aware where our biases are. So if I have a bias towards any person from any background, then I have to first ask myself, is it coming in my care? And that can be in terms of, am I avoiding seeing clients from this particular part of the society? Am I not training myself enough? Am I referring them enough? So when we talk of accessibility, we have to look at accessibility through a very different practical lens than just a right. So it's very difficult to really define who cannot access. We have to constantly ask ourselves, have more and more discussion with more and more people, and really be aware, be mindful to see who are not being able to access. And it is not just poverty driven. That's what one thing like, we always think of people who may not be financially strong enough, they are not being able to reach. But it was wonderful to hear about when Mr. Vikramji pointed out that, people who are incarcerated, and all of them are not like, when we are talking about a correctional home, there are people, they're under trials and convicted both. So how are they accessing mental health care? They're like, all these places we have to first identify, and then only we can actually make these services available and accessible to them.
Absolutely, ma'am. Very well said, very well formulated. It's a very gray area, honestly speaking. It's just not about talking about the rights. It's important to implement them as well.
And for a
So I
long,
have
long
another
period of
question.
time, the government, funding was mostly directed towards providing mental health care facility to the correctional inmates of the correctional homes and the residents of the shelter homes, children of these shelter homes. But government focus on requirement of mental health care to normal general citizenry is not something is always highlighted. And in most of the correctional homes also, mental health that care is that is provided is at the very least rudimentary stage. That is mostly directed towards something to reform that individual, not treatment. That is my own. This is a disclaimer that whatever I am saying, that are my personal views and not necessarily the views of my organization. But when I was a law student, I also used to go on research projects in various places and associated myself with various NGOs. So the counseling that we provide, or people used to provide at the prisons or correctional homes or to the inmates, that is more towards reforming them than treating them of their various disorders that they have been afflicted with during their long stay in the correctional home at the first place. And apart from that, there is lot of talk related to child rights, and as a corollary to that child rights, we find that child mental health care issues are also widely now discussed among government institutions. But child is a special subcategory, is a specific part of a big community. So there are many other communities or categories of individuals who are in need of mental health care. So focus is very rarely given to those communities, and sufficient funding is also sometimes is an issue in government sponsored hospitals. And the act has a limitation that only orders can be passed for directing treatment upon the institutions which are funded by the government. So we have to rely upon the government institutions for providing healthcare, and in all the government institutions, we cannot hope equal infrastructure or equal kind of treatment, or equal kind of trained manpower to be there. And obviously, India is a huge country having a big population. So in future, we'll be needing much more, mental health care professionals who are qualified enough and trained enough to realize the objectives of the acts, which are provisions of the acts which the parliament has passed. But it has to be realized in ground. Unless there are sufficient numbers of trained manpower, it is very difficult to realize those objectives.
True, very true. And just to add one small thing, I know we are running short of time. So just one small thing, I agree with the correctional home. Like when the term, I think from jail to correctional home also came with the idea of correcting. That is where the reforming. I remember when we joined, and that was long back, more than a decade back. I think more like almost 15 years back. But that was the first time somebody was being appointed as a clinical psychologist in a correctional home in West Bengal. So we were a team of 6, and our training was also on correctional aspect, because our training was based on what was being done all across the world. So we were being shown their training modules. But when we entered the space, like each one was responsible for one correct state correctional home, it was like my ratio was 1 is to 1200. I was the only clinical psychologist responsible for 1200 inmates. So it was impossible to really do anything impactful. Like we were very limited. We did as much as we could. So we sort of all our team, like we were 6 of us in different 6 correctional homes. So we implemented things like group therapy and mental health awareness and individual therapy as much as possible. But we also have to understand that the ratio is, it's impossible. It has to be 1 is to 25 or 30, whereas it was 1 is to 1200. And I don't know currently what the ratio is. So I can see that that thing is multiple times coming back in this conversation, that there is a lack of trained professionals.
The big takeaway from today's discussion is that even after coming of 2017 Act, there are lack of statistical figures and surveys, and we can always collaborate and do many research projects to highlight whether the Act of 2017 is being practically implemented or not. And I suggest that you take up these issues at the correct forums and get government attention.
I'll surely do that. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion. And I'll definitely connect with you further to see how further we can really do some actual groundwork, so that we can see real changes happening from the act. But the act was very promising and is still very promising, but there's so much more to do. So thank you again. We'll definitely take it up. We'll definitely take it up.
Thank you so much to both of you. But lastly, I would like to ask a general question. So we have talked about there are a lot of gaps still present in our community mental health services. So can we see any emerging trends or innovation that could possibly impact the mental health services?
I can respond to that first because I think we are like Therapy is one of those organizations where we have actually tried to, like, if you see our like initially when we were introducing Therapy, the main idea of Therapy was to make it accessible. It's a digital platform. So although it is a very like, we of course cannot reach out to everyone, but one of the things that we have seen when post COVID particularly, although telemental healthcare was there for more like forever, like it was like 2-3 decades back also people were practicing, but people did not really talk about it because offline services were the only thing that they talked about. But post COVID, people had been aware of the effectiveness of telepsychotherapy, and what the recent APA 2021 and 2022 study suggests is that it is as efficacious as face-to-face therapy based on there are of course certain things which cannot be done through online services, but approaches like CBT for specific methods and specific particular kind of population and disorders, it's as efficacious as face-to-face therapy. So I think one of the things, if we are really talking about accessibility, it is digitalization of telehealthcare service, and telemental healthcare service is one of the best ways to do that. And it is also good to see that even people from very, even the rural communities, they also now carry their phone. And of course, I'm not sure whether they have smartphones or not, but there's so much to, like, we can always find out, like, that's more of a government level work. But I always wanted Therapy to be associated with some kind of, or, some kind of movement like this, so that we can actually reach out to places where it is not easy to reach. And of course, there are difficulties where internet services are not available and all, but to maximize it. So digitalization definitely, app-based work as much as possible, because people are constantly, they're very mobile friendly, and people, I think right now, if anything is connecting people and bringing people together, these are like social media places. So we can actually use these platforms for actually creating and making the voices heard, to making them aware of their rights, to say how it can be accessed. So if you talk about innovations, I think it is time that we really start considering telemental healthcare services. We have already done that, and but it is only a particular sect of people who are very comfortable with that. So the people who are not been able to access it, maybe just to train them, and this probably is the best way to do that. Anything you
Thank you
want
so
to
much.
add?
And when there is a technology, we must harness it. The geographical barriers and the challenges can be surmounted by using technology. And now we can even record statements in courts. Virtual courts are operational in many parts of India and West Bengal as well. And COVID has taught us to keep ourselves updated. And there is no
Mm.
point in saying that we'll not talk over phone or will not have telemedicine sessions.
Mm.
So unless it is physically required to have direct face-to-face contact with the patient, we can always have access with app-based services. And Dr. Ananya is my very good friend, and I really feel very proud that she is doing a pioneering work in her field. And my good wishes to both of you. And
Thank
once again, thank you for inviting me today to
Thank you
share
so
my
much.
views with you. Thank you.
It has been our
Thank you so
absolute
much.
honor, and likewise, Vikram is a very good friend, and it's always wonderful to have conversations like this. And just to add, because we were talking about this, we are also um, proud to announce that we are probably one of the first Indian organization to have collaborated with a German organization called MHSS, who provide therapeutic services to sailors. So people who are sailing and out there for 6 months, to make therapy services available and accessible for them. We had, and particularly there are many Indians there, so just to make it available in their local languages also, because we have therapists who are well versed in 11 different languages. So we had done that. So we are really trying our best to make it as accessible as possible, and to leverage the digital aspect, because that connects people in so many ways.
That's so wonderful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vikramjeet, for actually, enlightening us. and highlighting some of the challenges. It's so important sometimes to talk about the reality of the situation, and that is when we can take suitable actions. So thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for doing it in such a short notice and giving your valuable time to us, and flooding us with such wonderful ideas. So we'll definitely try to take that forward, and wonderful again to have you with us. Thank you.
But I am looking forward to meet you, not over the phone.
Of course, I'll get in touch with you after this. I'll get in touch with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for having such an amazing and such a wonderful and fruitful conversation. And definitely, we have talked about a lot of innovations today. We have talked about surveys that we could implement further. And we need to let the conversation happen. And that is very, very important for all of us to at least start from somewhere. And we are ahead of it. We have started this journey, and we're going to keep making it happen. And also we need to provide the right set of training to the professionals. That is, there's a lot of disparity in the ratio of professionals and clients, so that need to be bridged in some way or the other. So thank you to both of you for such an amazing talk today.
Thank you. And thank you, Anisha, for making us feel so comfortable and moderating the session so well.
My pleasure, ma'am.
It was a wonderful experience being hosted by Anisha.
Thank you so much.
We can probably stop recording.